Malachi was the last Old Testament prophet around 450 BC, when the Persians controlled Judea. God had promised Israel great blessings, but they did not keep their covenants with him and rejected his prophets. The Jewish nation was taken into exile by the Babylonian Empire, then allowed to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. They taught and practiced the law of Moses, but gradually made their own learning and traditions more important than continuing revelation and honored dead prophets more than living ones. Educated scribes who kept and studied the spiritual records became teachers of the law they interpreted according to their own understanding. As the people's language changed from Hebrew to Aramaic, they had to rely on the scholars to understand the scriptures. These scribes competed with each other to teach their different points of view, which led to the creation of religious sects, including the Sadducees, Pharisees, and Essenes. The Persian Empire threatened many Greek cities, and in 334 BC, King Philip of Macedonia united the Greeks when his son Alexander conquered the Persians and eventually all Middle East nations, including Judea. Greek or Hellenic influences were felt for the next 400 years and brought pagan challenges to the Jews. Greek was the new language of the empire, and Jewish traditions, customs, and religion were thought to be primitive and barbaric. The Jews surrounded by this Greek influence fought hard to maintain their own identity. Sometime in the 3rd century BC, the Old Testament was translated from Hebrew into Greek, so children who were growing up learning only Greek could have access to the scriptures. Septuagint is the Greek word for 70, and tradition says that this new translation was completed by 70 Jewish scholars, and it was the most common Bible in use by 100 BC. Samaritans' Israelite blood had been diluted by Gentiles since their Babylonian captivity. They looked to Jerusalem for spiritual light, but when their efforts to help rebuild the temple were refused, they revolted and laid the foundation of their own temple. They then began to adopt the ways of the Gentiles and their Hellenic ideas. Jews, who had also given in to Greek pressure to change their own ways, now hated the Samaritans for abandoning the ways of their fathers. This destroyed the possibility of a union between them, and Jewish travelers from Galilee to Judea made long detours around Samaria to avoid being contaminated by their evil influence. War swept through the area, and finally General Seleucus conquered Syria and the Middle East, while Ptolemy took Egypt. These rivals fought for control of Judea that lay between them, while the Holy Land suffered. The Ptolemies took control in 301 BC, but the Seleucids did not want them to rule this country so close to their own land, and because of Judea's strategic importance as a defense base and the many trade routes that passed through it. The Seleucids then captured Judea in 200 BC, and the Jews suffered from these changes while their population grew. Alexandria in Egypt had the world's largest Jewish population, and large Jewish colonies in Babylon and other cities now outnumbered the Jews in Judea. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV came to power in 175 BC and tried to civilize the Jews by imposing Greek religion upon them to destroy their own religion. He saw Rome gaining world power and needed a stable people in the region, not the rebellious and difficult to govern Jews. He built a gymnasium in Jerusalem where young men competed nude in athletic contests, prompting many to turn away from the law of circumcision. He also introduced Greek philosophy, drama, and education, and while the upper Jewish class accepted this change, most Jews rejected it. A group known as the Sadducees formed who vowed to separate themselves from the impurities of others and strictly follow their own interpretation of the law, Jewish rituals, and Torah. These priests, merchants, and aristocrats from the wealthier upper society denied the soul's immortality and resurrection after death. They were willing to compromise with Roman rulers and Hellenism and were hated by the common people. Another group called Pharisees formed that believed in the written law given to Moses, but also in the oral law of the prophets' teachings and traditions of the Jews. They believed the law could be interpreted according to the Spirit and applied to life situations. Pharisees were primarily from the common people and became a larger group than the Sadducees. They believed in an afterlife where God punished the wicked and rewarded the righteous. The Sadducees and Pharisees became powerful rivals, and a third group called Essenes, or pious ones, formed to separate themselves from these two groups they hated. They believed that others had corrupted the city and temple, and moved into isolated communities to escape the world and avoid religious impurity. Their life was strict and highly structured. They avoided marriage, and they raised their own crops and tended flocks. Antiochus ordered the Jerusalem temple to be plundered in 169 BC. He sent troops into the holy city on the Sabbath, while the Jews who would not break the Sabbath did not resist. The city's walls were knocked down, and a garrison was put in a fortress near the desecrated temple. Temple worship, Sabbath day observance, celebrations, and circumcision were all stopped under penalty of death. Pigs that were unclean under Mosaic law were sacrificed in the temple, and Jews were forced to worship idols of Zeus and other false gods. Antiochus's efforts to destroy Judaism became more brutal when he ordered Jews who would not renounce their religion to be killed. But this only strengthened their rebellion, and in 167 BC, Greek soldiers gathered Jews and demanded that their priest, Mattathias, offer sacrifices to their pagan god or die. Another Jew stepped in and offered to do as the soldiers demanded, and as he lifted his knife, Mattathias killed both him and the Greek officer. Mattathias fled to the hills with his 5 sons and called on all of Judah to join their revolt. The Jewish nation then joined forces to fight for their religious freedom. Mattathias died, and his son Judah Maccabeus, called the Hammer, was a military genius who defeated many larger forces in the Maccabean revolt. Jerusalem was reconquered, and the temple was purified and rededicated in 164 BC. Jews were now free from foreign tyranny for the first time in over 400 years. Judah then fought the Seleucids and established an alliance with Rome. After his death, his brothers Jonathan and Simeon strengthened Judea's influence and extended its borders. The people became corrupted with power and glory, and quickly forgot that it was the Lord who had delivered them. Judea fell into the hands of the Romans when Pompey annexed it in 63 BC. The Pharisees became popular with the people and were brought into power. The Sadducees fell out of favor, but then regained their power, and by the time of Jesus Christ, they controlled the Sanhedrin and the office of high priest. Pompey appointed Antipater as a puppet king over Judea, who helped the Romans fight the Parthians. As payment, his son Herod the Great was granted the right to be appointed king of Judea. The Jews hated Herod, who was not a Jew, and was a brutal and vicious administrator. The Romans were pleased with his control over the Jews and his efforts to bring back Hellenic and Roman culture through building programs paid for by heavy taxes. Herod gave power and prestige to the Sadducees by building on the Temple Mount. Jews were given limited political power in the Sanhedrin, a religious and political body of 71 men presided over by a high priest. After Jesus Christ's birth, Herod died, and the kingdom was divided among his 3 sons, with Herod Antipas ruling over Galilee. A group of Jews called Herodians supported his reign, believing it was a fulfillment of messianic ideas. Another party called the Zealots formed in 6 AD and supported the law of Moses while opposing the Herodians and Roman taxation. These rebels wanted to keep Judea like the Maccabees and believed that violence was justified. Romans called them the Sicarii, meaning dagger, because they often mixed with crowds with daggers under their cloaks to assassinate Roman supporters. While violent, the Zealots were strictly religious and believed that only the overthrow of Rome would bring about God's kingdom. There was no recorded prophet during the 450 years after Malachi, but people prayed daily as a priest offered incense upon the temple altar in the holy place. Then a priest named Zacharias saw an angel who told him, "Thy prayer is heard. Thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son, and he shall make ready a people prepared for the Lord." This child, named John, was the promised messenger who would go forth in the spirit of Elias to declare that God's kingdom was at hand. John the Baptist was the prophet called to prepare the way for the Messiah, who would come to earth as the Son of God and deliver Israel. The Old Testament had ended, and the New Covenant, or New Testament, began. And this is what happened between the Old and New Testaments. Look for hidden images located in the video. You can support Ponderfun by visiting our Etsy site with coloring pages and activities, or our ponderfun.com website and Facebook page to find more fun things to do. Please like and share these videos with anyone you think might enjoy them. Also, please subscribe to this Ponderfun YouTube channel. Thanks again for watching, and find some time this week to ponder.